Hello and welcome to a new series for AutomateDV, where I will be answering your questions, hopefully well, about all things AutomateDV, data warehousing related to data vault, and pretty much anything else as long as it's relevant. I'm Alex Higgs, and I am the lead developer and product owner of AutomateDV. These questions will be selected from the UK Data Vault user group forums, or alternatively from the AutomateDV Slack channel. On to the questions. Is there any way to disable the trimming during hash generation in AutomateDV? Currently, no. It's a feature that's on our backlog. We want to make the basically all hashing functionality in AutomateDV. We want to make it as functional and as configurable as possible, because we appreciate there are some things that you're not going to want to do for every use case. The current hashing approach follows the data vault standard and sort of general hashing standards in the industry, to be honest, not just data vault. So we've tried to kind of make it do what most people would want to do with hashing. It trims white space. It normalizes everything to certain cases. It does all kinds of stuff in there to normalize the data. The reason for that, sort of going back in history, really, is most of the time casing and white space doesn't change the meaning of the data. There will be some cases for some clients and that we have some users of AutomateDV, for example, where it will, or at least it's something you want to act on downstream in your data warehouse. So, for example, if someone changes their name and you want to record that a name has changed, but maybe that name change has only been this. Maybe they type it the first time and they've got a lowercase on their surname, but they want to change it to uppercase for the first letter of their surname. I've done that on things like eBay, Amazon, because I'm picky and I just want to make sure that my name is cased properly. If the database, the hashing process didn't see that as a change and didn't load that new data, then we wouldn't be able to detect that. Some people that's going to matter, some databases, some systems that's going to matter, some is not. So a lot of these questions we get around, can we disable this? Can we enable that in the hashing? Some of it, yes. Most of it, no. At the moment, we want to make them more configurable for these exact use cases. Appreciate there's a long answer to quite a simple question. But yeah, essentially, we want to make this as configurable as possible. Currently, it isn't. We're going to work on it, don't worry. Next question. Hi folks, we're looking at incorporating DBT's model versioning with AutomateDV, but running into a lot of walls when trying to reference pre-release versions as a source model for stages, satellites, things like that. Before going too far down the troubleshooting route, I thought it was best to stop in to ask. So this is a question from our Slack. It's a very good question. AutomateDV does currently support model versioning. However, we haven't really updated our documentation with any examples of how to do that. The reason being is because it's primarily a feature of DBT rather than AutomateDV. The great thing about AutomateDV is we are in the DBT ecosystem. So a lot of it is DBT side. A lot of the functionality is on DBT side. We essentially just cover the data vault bit. However, it would be great. I appreciate if we had some more examples in the documentation, so we'll make sure that gets added. I believe there was some lengthy conversation on Slack about this afterwards, and I pitched in on it as well. So yes, it does work. You have to kind of work around it at the moment. So not only will we add it to documentation, but we'll make sure that it makes it's a bit easier as well. So the issue that this guy's having is the current syntax for providing a source model only allows you to use the reference syntax or the source syntax for DBT without any clear instruction on how to provide the version syntax within that. So that's the answer. And we'll make sure that gets updated. Thank you for that question. I really appreciate questions like this because it makes sure that we update the documentation and improve things for everyone in the community when people are trying things out like this. So thanks very much. Okay, so next question, defining hard rules versus soft rules. This is a good one. This isn't really specific to AutomateDV, actually. I do like this question. And it's an age-old question about how much really, at what point does a transformation or a change to the data become a soft rule? And at one point does it become, is it a hard rule and not a soft rule? Just to clarify to those watching, a hard rule essentially is, and I always get these mixed up in my head because to me, the naming's never quite clicked in my head. But what a hard rule is something that essentially transforms the data without changing the meaning of the data. So these can be things like removing white space, trimming, kind of generally cleaning up the data, maybe performing lookups, although that one's a gray area, which we'll get into. And soft rules are essentially where you start really transforming the data. So you might perform a calculation, you might multiply something out, you might start aggregating, joining things up, grouping, that kind of thing. Those generally are soft rules because you're changing the grain of the data, you're changing the ultimate meaning of the data, and the business will make different decisions based on that new meaning. So that's where you get your soft rules. So the question specifically is, where is the line? Is there a definitive line? I'd like to say yes, but different situations, people are going to say different things. So I'll give my opinion here. So he says, basic cleansing, functions like trimming white space, casting data types, standardizing the case upper lower, generally considered acceptable. Are they generally considered acceptable hard rules for the staging area? Are things like composite keys an acceptable hard rule for the staging area? Does this cross into business logic? Very good question. So I'm very much of the opinion that the staging layer, as per Dataport standards, you shouldn't be doing any transformation there. You shouldn't even be doing any joining of tables, really, if you can help it. The only reason we do that with sometimes in AutomateDV is because of the limitation of DBT, where you can't load more than one model into another model because it's all pure SQL. You have to do a union first, essentially. And there are ways around that. Now that DBT has UDFs available and things like that, or natively supported UDFs, I should say. We're going to look into potentially getting around that limitation in AutomateDV using that approach, which would be very interesting. Watch this space. But back to my original point, so trimming, casting, upper, lower, all that kind of stuff. That's considered acceptable in staging because you're not changing the meaning of the data. That's kind of the key point there. You're cleaning up the data so that downstream it's got better processing. Now, whether they have to be in the staging layer is another matter. It depends what that data's gonna be doing downstream. So if, for example, you've got a business key where sometimes it's got white space in it, and that's going to affect your joining when it comes to, or at least affect your relationships when it comes to hubs, things, satellites, and things like that, then absolutely, you're going to have to clean that up in staging because otherwise it's going to break your relationship, relational integrity between your hubs, things, and satellites, which is your integration layer. If you can't integrate because of silly things like that, essentially, absolutely clean them up. But it should be minimal and it should be considered. You shouldn't just do everything in staging, especially not business logic and pure soft rules, I should say, in the staging layer. That's what your business vault is for, and post raw vaults to objects and satellites. That's where your soft rules should live. Essentially, in my opinion, there is a hard line in terms of what is acceptable in the staging layer, but whether you have to do it in the staging layer is the question. If you can leave it till later, do it later, because that means you are minimizing how much you do to the raw data, and you're keeping it as raw as possible. That's the intent of the staging layer: is raw data in, don't do anything to it unless you really have to do the integration downstream. If you can leave it in for the marts, put it in the mart, put the soft rule in put the soft rule in the mart, or put the hard rule in the mart. You can leave it to the presentation layer, so you get kind of variation of soft rules, which are presentation rules, which are, you only apply them in the last layer for, going to dashboard or going into the going into your mart, essentially. Ultimately, you have to be very careful about audit. So if you have lots of rules in the staging, lots of rules in your business vault, and then lots of rules in your presentation layer, it's going to be very difficult to kind of, unless you're very careful with naming and the structure of your project in the case of DBT, it's going to be hard to, or at least harder to track where that data got transformed. Of course, DBT helps with the lineage, and you will be able to work it out, but at a glance, it'll be more difficult, is what I'm trying to say. So I think do as little as possible in staging, keep the data as raw as possible. Do what you can later if you can do it later, and if you do only what you have to do in the raw vault, in the staging layer, in the raw staging layer, to get it ready for audit. Get it ready for the later processing downstream. I say audit there because sometimes you'll need to add your audit columns like load date, record source in staging. And that's you're adding metadata for the downstream processing. That's why we add it in the raw vault, because they are in the raw staging, because they are required for downstream in Hubs and satellites. We would add them later if we could. That's just one example. Okay, enough on that question. Okay, so next question, integrating multiple source systems. When integrating multiple source systems, e.g. two different ERPs, should the staging area always maintain a one-to-one relationship with the source tables? Is it ever viable to create one large combined staging view per source, joining all its relevant tables before loading it into the raw vault, or does this introduce too much complexity and obscure the raw data? It's a very good question. The short answer is no, but let's explore that. So this all comes back to audit trails, understanding where the data came from, which you've kind of hinted at there. Yeah, it does obscure the raw data in some ways. Apart from anything else, it makes it more difficult to scale over time as well. So what happens when you get a new table from that source system? Are you going to have to do you join that new table onto your one big table that you've created of 5 other tables? And now you've got a new one big table. Do you drop the old one big table and make a new one big table to replace it, rather than having one big table and then another table and another table? The idea of keeping it all separate just means that if a new table comes in, you just add a new table, and then that can passively integrate better into your raw vault. That's a big part of it. It's essentially scaling. Scaling and audit are the two things that I'm aware of. If anyone else has any insight on that, please feel free to leave a comment. So short answer, no, don't do it. I can't think of any situations where you'd want to do it. There might be situations where it's easier now, but you're going to pay for it later when suddenly you need to add all these new tables. It's going to become a headache. So save yourself, spend a bit more effort now, so that you don't have to untangle a mess of joins later that you realize you've had because you've started joining all these new tables together. Is my advice. I like this question. I have a scenario of creating data vault on an XML file data. This file is having multiple nested elements for each unique identifier. That's where the question stops. So I'm going to assume that having multiple nested elements for each unique identifier, yeah, you've got some complexity there, because semi-structured data, you've got a lot of nesting. I had a client recently where we had lots of XML files, and those XML files had probably 10 layers of nesting in them each, and then each of those nested bits of information referenced other areas of the XML, and yeah, especially with XML, can get very nested and very messy very quickly. you can't have the same issue with JSON. Anything that's semi-structured, you're going to nesting is what kind of comes to bite you later or now, actually. You know, when you're loading it, that can cause complexity. So the advice there is keep it so just to go back quickly. So when we take that semi-structured data and kind of remove that structure from it and separate it into its distinct components. So say, for example, one XML file might translate to about 10 tables, depending on the level of nesting and all the information. That process is called flattening, right? So generally speaking, unless there is data in your XML or your semi-structured file that you have to integrate it in the raw vault. So in your Hubs instance satellites, maybe there's some IDs or things like that. You should leave it. You should leave it unflattened. So leave it as a big XML blob or a JSON blob. Most modern databases allow you to do that. So I know Snowflake's really good. You have the variant columns, for example. There are alternatives and things like Databricks. So leave it as the big file blob and then extract data as needed later. And what some people do is actually in their satellites, rather than having, say, 10 columns in your payload, you have one column that's just the full semi-structured blob of data. And then you can have that come downstream. And then if you ever need to extract some of those columns to display it in a dashboard, you just extract as needed as late as possible when you actually need that data. It makes it a lot easier to reason about in all of your prior stages, so upstream from the dashboards. It makes it a lot more scalable as well. So if anyone adds new columns to that structure, you don't have to go back and change the schema of any of the tables. You don't have to worry about that. You just leave it as a blob and extract as needed, as necessary, as late as possible is my advice. Saying that, like I said, some structures may have IDs and things like that nested in it that you will need for joining and integrating later downstream. So what you want to do is only extract as necessary those columns from that structure. So you know, if you need to go down a few levels and extract an ID, take those out, that's fine. But otherwise leave that blob as intact as possible. I hope that answered my question in enough. You know, please reach out in the comments if that was you and you see this. Please feel free to reach out to me or in the comments or in Slack or in the user group forums. I'll be happy to go into more detail with you. Patrick Kuber also has some great stuff on this. So he works for Snowflake. The Data Vault Guru. One of his books is down there actually. And you know, he's great. He's got a lot of really good blogs, especially on unstructured data and specifically for Snowflake, but you can take some of the learnings and approach to dealing with it to other platforms as well. Learning about Data Vault based on industry best practices. I know satellite are materialized as incremental. So I think this is AutomateDV DVT specific question. Should hubs and links be the same? Depending on the answer, what is the reasoning behind it? So yes, they absolutely should be the same. The reason being is you have to remember hubs and links are kind of primary integration tables. Though, you know, your hubs are your business keys for a particular entity. So hub customer are all your business keys for your customers. So very important. Links are the same essentially, but they are all the business keys for a relationship between two entities, or at least the two or more entities that link is for. So you could have customer order line item, that kind of thing. And there'll be all the keys for all the combinations of those keys for those relationships. So just going over about a bit of the fundamentals there, because it's important. Is if you fully understand that, what will then happen is if you have lots of source systems where those business keys and entities are coming from, that table is going to grow quite significantly over time. And we could be talking millions of records coming and updating over time. We could be talking maybe hundreds, thousands. The scale varies depending on the source system, depending on the entity that you're loading. what you don't want to be doing from a performance and cost point of view is reloading that table every single time. You can, there's nothing wrong with that, because there's no history in them, so it won't matter from a history point of view. However, if you're reloading millions of records each time, eventually the cost is going to add up. It's not very performant, and also if you ever have any right to be forgotten requests, things like that, where you will actually be needing to mask or delete, soft delete any of those, or even hard delete any of those, then you won't be able to have that audit trail. Because if, for example, you have any record tracking satellites attached to your hubs, which track when you saw records coming into that particular source, if you're reloading it each time, that potentially could break that audit trail there as well. So yeah, they're not incremental for the same reasons as satellites, which I think is where the confusion comes from. But they are incremental for cost optimizations and essentially audit purposes. Hope that helps. And if anyone has any more insight on that particular answer, I'm not going to pretend to know everything. Please feel free to comment in the comments below. Thank you very much. Has anyone implemented multi-axis satellites using AutomateDV package? Well, yes, I have, but then again, I developed them, right? I'm not sure exactly where this question is going. It might be, for example, that they're quite complex. I completely understand that. We do want to kind of improve the documentation around the multi-axis satellites, actually. However, a lot of that is helped by understanding how they're supposed to work in data vault. The kind of the fundamentals of data vault really would help with this. The thing to remember is multi-axis satellites really aren't that different from normal satellites. The loading pattern is exactly the same. It's just that you might have multiple records for a particular point in time where all of those can be active at one point in time. That's the difference in the actual data. Like I say, the loading pattern is the same. We have to we handle the loading and the each entity as a group in the satellite rather than one to one. Essentially, it's the idea there. We could probably go into a lot more detail on multi-axis satellites. Maybe that's a future one of these that we go into multi-axis satellites specifically, because they're quite interesting actually. So thank you for that question. Sorry if I didn't do that justice. Hopefully that helps. We do have an example in the documentation, but like I say, it could be a bit more fleshed out. So we'll make sure that gets done. Thank you. And I think that is it for today. So I will leave it there. Hopefully, if you guys enjoy this, I'd love to do some more. Please, if there's any questions you want answered, please put them in the comments, email us. We'll make sure the details are at the end of the video. But with that, I will say thank you very much for listening. And I've been Alex Higgs, AutomateDV. Happy data vaulting.